At 400 hours local time, the people of Tver woke to a sound that did not belong over their city, the low, insect drone of engines crossing the night sky. Minutes later, the air defense opened up. Then a storage tank in the elevator industrial zone tore open, and a wall of orange fire climbed into the dark. A column of black smoke rose nearly 350 feet, visible across the Volga. Inside that tank farm sat roughly 1.7 million gallons of gasoline and diesel, fuel meant for 52 filling stations and the military units of an entire Russian region. But what made this strike remarkable was not the fire, it was the map. Tver sits 323 miles from the Ukrainian border and only 110 miles northwest of Moscow. To reach it, Ukrainian drones had to fly the length of the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, past the outer ring of the capital's air defense belt, past S-400 batteries and 100 Pantsir systems built to shield the Kremlin itself. Every expert said a cheap, propeller-driven drone could never survive that corridor. That night, over a fuel depot on the Moscow-St. Petersburg Artery, Ukraine proved them wrong. On a map of the war, Tver looks like nothing. No front line runs near it, no trenches, no artillery duels. It is a quiet provincial city on the upper Volga, halfway between Moscow and St. Petersburg. And that quiet was exactly the point. The depot that burned belonged to Tver Product, a company that receives, stores, and distributes light petroleum products, gasoline, and diesel. From this single-tank farm, fuel flowed to a network of 52 filling stations and to wholesale buyers across the entire Tver region. It fed civilian traffic on the highways. It also fed the fuel tanks of local military units. Cut a hub like this, and the shortage spreads outward for days, one dry pump at a time. But the real prize sat right next door. Directly adjacent to the Tver Product site is a state fuel storage facility called Krasnaya Zarya, operated by Rosreserv, the agency that guards Russia's strategic reserves. These are not everyday tanks. Rosreserv fuel is set aside for prolonged crises and large-scale military operations, the reserve a country reaches for when the ordinary supply runs out. Two fuel complexes side by side, one commercial and one strategic, in the same industrial zone. And their location made them a nerve, not just a target. Tver straddles the M10 highway and the October Railway, the twin arteries linking Moscow and St. Petersburg. Nearly everything moving between Russia's two great cities passes through here. This was the kind of place Moscow believed was safe, tucked deep in the rear, behind the outer ring of the capital's air defense fortress, a place no drone was ever supposed to reach. Here is the math that keeps Russian air defense officers awake. An S-400 is one of the most capable air defense systems ever built. It can track targets hundreds of miles away and strike aircraft and ballistic missiles at the edge of the sky. It is also the wrong tool for this fight. Its interceptors cost millions of dollars each, and against a slow, propeller-driven drone worth a tiny fraction of that, every shot is a losing trade. Fire and you win the engagement but lose the exchange. Hold your fire and the drone flies on. The S-400 was designed to kill things far more expensive than itself. Now it faced things far cheaper. And the signs of strain were everywhere. Analysts studying imagery from the Moscow belt noticed Pantsir launchers deployed with only 2 missiles loaded on a side instead of a full rack. A small detail that hinted at something larger. A shortage of the very interceptors needed to stop a drone swarm. At the Tver depot itself, crews had draped protective nets over the fuel tanks, a physical last resort against small drones. Satellite images taken before the strike showed the nets in place. They did not hold. That is the asymmetry Ukraine has learned to exploit. It does not need to defeat the S-400. It does not need to destroy the 100 Pantsir systems ringing Moscow, or empty their magazines, or win a duel of technology against technology. It only needs to make that entire network a few seconds too slow. Slow to see, slow to decide, slow to fire. A billion-dollar fortress can be beaten not by a bigger hammer, but by a target too small, too cheap, and too numerous to be worth stopping. A used car costs more than one of these drones. That night, the used cars were coming for the fortress. To understand what the drones were flying into, picture Moscow's defenses as a set of nested rings, one of the densest air defense networks in the world. As of spring 2026, open-source analysts counted well over 100 air defense positions in and around the capital, and Tver sits just beyond that outer edge. The outermost layer is the S-400 Triumf, long-range radar and interceptors meant to catch cruise missiles and aircraft far out. Behind it, shorter-range systems fill the gaps. The Tver M2, a point defense system built to swat low, slow targets out of the sky. And at the innermost edge stands the workhorse of this war, the Pantsir-S-1, the goalkeeper. A single Pantsir carries 12 ready-to-fire missiles and two 30mm 2A38M automatic cannons, with 1,400 rounds between them. Its missiles reach out to about 12 miles and up to 49,000 feet. Its guns sweep everything from 650 feet out to 2.5 miles. Around Moscow, roughly 100 of these guard the rings, some now hoisted onto towers, and newer Pantsir-SMD-E variants lifted onto the rooftops of the city's tallest buildings. That is the shield. Now the spear? The drones on their way to Tver were long-range, one-way attack UA-5Ds of the type Ukraine builds by the thousand, most likely the An-196 Lyutyy, a slim, straight-winged aircraft that flies low and slow on a pre-programmed route. It does not depend on a live pilot signal for the whole flight. It navigates by inertial guidance and a memorized path, so jamming its radio or spoofing its GPS does not send it home. Its warhead weighs only tens of pounds, small against a fortress, but more than enough against a fuel tank. And flying with the strike drones were decoys, cheap airframes like the SPEKTR, shaped to mimic the real thing, carrying an adjustable radar reflector instead of a warhead. Their only job was to make a Pantsir crew guess wrong. At 0410 hours local time, the first warning was almost nothing. A smear of weak returns at the edge of an S-400's radar, too slow to be missiles, too low to be jets. The drones had spread out. Instead of one fat contact, the operator saw a scatter of faint signals appearing and vanishing behind the terrain, each one forcing a decision. And this was the trap. From the moment a signal firmed up to the moment an interceptor could leave the rail, the crew needed several seconds to confirm the track, classify it, and commit a missile. In those few seconds, a drone crossing the ground at 110 miles an hour covered nearly a quarter of a mile. The radar worked, the missiles had range, but everything was happening too low and too slow to fit the way the system was drawn on paper. 2 drones went down at the outer edge. That loss was already counted. By 0424 hours local time, the swarm had pushed into the middle layer, and this was where the decoys earned their cost. The SPEKTR airframes surged ahead, their radar reflectors tuned to shine like real attack drones. On the Russian screens, the count doubled. Was that a warhead racing for the depot, or an empty shell built to waste a missile? A crew has seconds to choose, and every missile spent on a decoy is a missile not there for the real one. They fired, interceptors climbed, empty airframes died in bright flashes, and behind them the real drones kept coming unremarked in the confusion. Then, at 0431 hours local time, a system that should not have been there opened fire. In the weeks before, Russia had been quietly pulling air defense units from the front and from other regions to thicken the shield around Moscow. One of those relocated Pantsir batteries, a goalkeeper freshly craned into position near the Tver approach, had gone unlisted in Ukraine's route plan. Its first burst of 30mm fire ripped through the formation without warning. On the control feed, telemetry from the lead group scattered. For a heartbeat, the whole run teetered. Imagine you are that Pantsir commander. Your screen is a mess of contacts, some real, some ghosts. Your magazine is short, you were deployed with half a load. You have maybe 10 seconds before the survivors slip under your guns. Which do you shoot? Tell us in the comments what you would do. The Ukrainian operators did what they had rehearsed. The formation dropped down toward the rooftops and the treetops, down to where the Volga cut a dark line through the city, and the October Railway ran straight as a ruler toward the depot. Those two features became the navigation system now. Not GPS, which could be spoofed, but the river and the rail line, memorized from satellite images, holding the drones on course while the Pantsir's radar struggled to separate them from the ground clutter beneath. At 0438 hours local time, The swarm reached the thing it had been built to survive, the Pantsir-S-1 at the inner edge, guns already tracking. Its cannons can throw a wall of 30mm fire 2.5 miles out, so the drones refused to give it a clean shot. They pressed lower still, hugging the industrial sprawl on the city's southern edge, forcing the barrels down toward the horizon where every burst risked the ground behind the target. The Pantsir fired anyway. More drones fell, but at that altitude, skimming the rooftops of the elevator zone, the survivors were almost impossible to hold. Small, cold, and close, sliding through the last ring toward the tank farm. And at 0442 hours local time, the drones met Russia's last physical answer. The anti-drone nets stretched over the fuel tanks, steel and cable strung to catch what the missiles had missed. The lead drone crossed the fence line, and through its camera the tanks resolved out of the dark, round, netted, waiting. The pilot did not need the tops, he needed a seam, the gap where the netting met the pumping gantry, the edge no cover reached. 2 seconds to the tanks, 1. By the time the survivors reached the tank farm, most of the swarm was gone. The outer ring had taken its 2. The decoys had spent themselves drawing fire. The relocated Pantsir had torn more out of the formation, and the goalkeepers' guns had claimed the last of the stragglers. On a Russian status report, the numbers would look like a victory, a long column of intercepts, most of the raid destroyed. But the raid was never meant to arrive whole. Every drone that fell had bought a few seconds of confusion, a missile off the rack, a barrel turned the wrong way, and those seconds were the whole point. Enough got through. That too was already counted. The first drone found its seam. It slipped past the netting where the cover met the pumping gantry and drove into the flank of a storage tank. The warhead was small, only tens of pounds, but it did not need to be large. Its charge punched through the steel skin, and for an instant nothing happened. Just a torn hole and a spray of fuel. Then the vapor above the liquid found the heat. The tank did not so much explode as ignite from within. A flash of fire racing across the fuel surface, pressure lifting the roof, flame venting into the pre-dawn dark. A second drone came in behind it into the next tank in the row, and the fire that was already climbing gave the new blast something to feed on. This is how a fuel depot dies, not in one clean explosion, but in a chain. One ruptured tank throws burning fuel onto its neighbors. The heat softens the next wall, the next vapor space catches, the fire walks down the row faster than any crew can fight it. The protective nets, meant to be the last line, now hung in shreds over the flames, the shield that had been strung across the tanks doing nothing to stop the fire spreading beneath them. The regional governor would confirm the essential truth by morning. A storage tank at the Tver oil depot had caught fire during the attack, and firefighters did not bring it under control until after 7 o'clock. No one was reported hurt. But by then the smoke was already a black column over the Volga, and the fuel that was supposed to flow to 52 stations and a region's military was burning in place. There is a difference between destruction and paralysis. Destruction burns a target, one tank farm, one night's fuel. Paralysis is what happens when the enemy has to change how the whole system works. Tver was both. The fire was the small part. The larger blow was what it proved. Ukraine's president called this campaign long-range sanctions, a deliberate, methodical strike on the fuel and money that keep the war running. And it is working. Refinery after refinery, depot after depot, the strikes have stacked up into a genuine fuel crisis inside Russia, with gasoline shortages and rationing reported across multiple regions. Tver was not a lucky shot. It was one entry on a long and growing list, hit the same night as depots in Stavropol, a pumping station in Bashkortostan, a terminal on the Sea of Azov, and a strategic reserve facility hundreds of miles from any front. And here is the trap Moscow has walked into. To protect its rear, Russia has been pulling air defense systems off the front line and stacking them around the capital. Over 100 launchers, ringing the city like a fortress. But every Pantsir, craned onto a tower near Moscow, is a Pantsir no longer covering troops in the field. Every S-400 held back to guard an oil depot is one not defending an advance. Ukraine forces the choice with nothing more than cheap drones and patience. Defend the front or defend the fuel. You cannot do both everywhere, and the moment you choose, a hole opens somewhere else. That is why a quiet city 110 miles from Moscow matters. It tells Russia that the map has no safe corners left. that the arithmetic of this war now runs against the side with the bigger, more expensive shield. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the most heavily defended airspace on Earth can be crossed by a drone that costs less than a used car, what exactly is left that Russia can call secure? If you believe Ukraine deserves to live in peace and freedom, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Every bit of support helps more people understand what is really happening in this war. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.